Good day to you. Thousands of television shows and movies and radio stations are producing content every single minute of the day. And that content is telling us how to behave. It's giving us ideas for fashion choices. It's talking to us about information that it says that we should know when it comes to news and politics. In other words, what's happening is those media are producing culture. Yeah, they are producing culture, a way of living. And that's what we're taking on in this chapter today. We're talking about a cultural analysis now. We're moving on from a rhetorical analysis, taking on a cultural analysis. And this school of thought comes out of a region of Britain called the Birmingham School, Birmingham University, but the Birmingham School in particular is where cultural theory, as it is known, was born. And most people think about culture as being something that could be high culture, that it's the study of opera or it's the study of symphony music or the study of high scientific knowledge. No, it's not described that way in this chapter and in this analytical framework. Culture is the way that humans live. Yeah, it's about what humans produce and the means by which they preserve what they have purchased. Most people today have photographs that are just basically in photo albums stored with social media. Wherever you've sent your photos on Snapchat or Facebook or Instagram, that's where your photos are stored today. So this is how we're producing memories in a way. We're producing memories and then storing them with clouds, with social media clouds. That's how we're preserving what we've done in life. And when we talk about culture, we have three different types of culture. We've got physical culture, which is the artifacts and the natural environment that's around us, the physical things. And then we've got social culture, which is the norms that govern how we use the artifacts and in the environment. For example, a cell phone is something that you do not use in the middle of a class. And that's because we have societal rules that say that it would be rude to do that, but you can use a cell phone in the middle of the cafeteria. That's no problem because our rules govern the use of cell phone use and making it okay in that kind of a setting. So those are examples of social culture norms. And then we also have attitudinal norms, and you can read about that in the chapter. So what are the functions of ideology? That's one of the key words that's used in cultural studies. When you study culture using cultural theory, there's a whole lexicon of language. There's a whole base of terms that are used, and this is one of them. It's ideology. And ideology is a way of seeing the world. It's a way of seeing the world that we're not necessarily aware of. That way of seeing the world can both limit some of our ideas about the world, and it can also enhance our ideas. So, for example, most people in this class would say that just flat out communists are bad, that communists have terrible ideas and they just can't be trusted, and it's a kind of a black cloud on the earth, communism. But most of you, in fact, maybe all of you, have probably never met a communist. You've never had a single conversation with a communist. And so how can it be that you can have such a decided opinion against communism? That's an example of ideology. It's a belief system that kind of sneaks up on you, and you don't really know that you have it. And it's fairly comprehensive, but it's also sneaky because it sneaks up on you. So it limits and enhances at the same time. It limits our ideas of what communism can do for people. And so in the area of media, for example, many communist countries, China and Russia, are actually have the viewpoint because of communism that they should provide media content that is uplifting to the nation. There should be symphony and opera. The Chinese opera is very big in China, and that's funded by the government to uplift the people's appreciation of media content. Otherwise, everything would be keeping up with the Kardashians. So that's an example of how ideology can sneak in on you. And there are some interest groups that we take a look at when we look at ideology, because those interest groups are saying that they are perceived to be a privilege. They have privileged viewpoints. And those viewpoints are the viewpoints that are used in the media. So the privileged people are the college educated people who work in the media. They are the owners. They are the investors. They are the advertising executives. Those are privileged people versus minorities, versus poor, versus immigrants, versus criminals. So those people don't have their culture as expressed as much. Now, there are different ideological processes that the chapter talks about. One is called a myth, We've talked already about a myth. I won't cover that with Roland Barthes in the last chapter. Then there's also two terms that are, again, part of the lexicon of cultural theory, and one of them is doxa. Doxa is knowledge that's beyond question. So all of the knowledge right now that we're just accepting from doctors about the coronavirus, we're accepting it without questioning whether that knowledge is correct or not. I mean, you may be questioning, but as a whole, that is a doxa. It's a knowledge that is beyond question. And then there's hegemony. Hegemony, that's the process by which one ideology subverts another ideology. So with the coronavirus, one ideology might be, I'm not going to give up my life. I'm going to keep on living. You can't stop living. But then the other ideology of, no, there has to be public safety and you have to make sure that you're not risking other people if you are infected, subverts the taking a chance ideology. So that's hegemony. One ideology subverts another. Now, there are two main theorists that are talked about in this chapter. They come out of the Birmingham School. One is Stuart Hall, and the other is Raymond Williams. And Raymond Williams and Stuart Hall, they're both talking about structuralism. Structuralism is how ideology and power and privilege and oppression, they all go together because of the structure of the economics of a country's culture. So in the United States, the economics of our culture has us trying to make money off of everything. And that means that media, it's perfectly acceptable for media to tease you all day long to keep you watching. We talked a little bit about teasing in the last chapter, but saying coming up next, and then not telling you what it is that's coming up until you have to wait until you watch a bunch of advertisements. Same goes with newspaper articles. You have to skip across ads to continue on in the story. Same with web pages. You have to click and close a bunch of boxes and banners that are popping up all the time. And so what we're talking about here is the structure, the structuralism of capitalism here then makes our use of media somewhat fragmented, right? It's constantly being stopped and started, again, because of these ads that are popping up. And so it's a fragmented viewing process. That's how structuralists would think. And then there's also culturalists. Culturalists, talking about Raymond Williams and Stuart Hall, these two authors that are writing and contributing to cultural theory. Culturalists have particular beliefs and activities that are in a given culture. So if you visit almost any Arab culture, there's a whole governing philosophy about how females should dress according to the Quran. And so there's the particular beliefs that are being promoted there, and those beliefs also are extended to the media. The media are not allowed to display, in Saudi Arabia, for example, women without their face being covered. All right, now let's go on to ideology and the media representations of class. And in this section, we're going to look at how popular media texts, there's that word text, popular media text, that's the content, how they communicate, justify, and maintain disproportionate socioeconomic status. So that's ultimately what cultural studies is trying to do. It's trying to figure out, why are there still so many poor people? Why are there still so many disadvantaged people? Why are minorities, not just in terms of ethnicity, but in terms of belief systems, why are they still dominated by some special interest groups, by bourgeois people from the French term? There is the American dream that we believe in, but the average citizen is not going to necessarily become a rich person, but it's always there. It's always there as a possibility, and that's what keeps us going. So media representations of class have a lot to do with that, and the way that they do that is by exclusion. By exclusion, for example, if you don't see a documentary on, let's say, a slave uprising in Southern history, then it doesn't exist, right? Because there has not been a documentary that's created that covers that slave uprising. And so it's an example of how exclusion is taking place in the media by certain events are not covered, and therefore they don't exist. Another way that ideology and representation takes place in the media is stereotyping. Stereotyping that's presenting constant views of people, often African Americans. When they are portrayed in media, they're portrayed in crime situations, they're portrayed in cops type shows, and they're portrayed as in ways that are unflattering. And we can say that the same can be said for Latinos and the kinds of jobs that they are seen to be holding in shows. Working class jobs Not that there's anything wrong with working class jobs, but it's just stereotyping. And then there's another concept of assimilation. Assimilation is representing minority groups by stripping them of their original beliefs. So if you have a person who is second generation from Africa, they may be wanting to wear African dress. African dress is very typically multiple colored and a complete gown. But you're not going to see that in television very much. You're not going to see Africans wearing traditional African dress. So assimilation is representing those minority groups, but with representing them without original cultural beliefs. And then there's a concept of othering. Othering is where you marginalize minorities. You talk about them in a way that separates them out. Immigrants, for example, the way that immigrants are talked about in the media separates out people from Americans, as if immigrants cannot be Americans. They are separate people to be treated separately and differently. That's what othering does. And then finally, you have exoticism. Exoticism is where images of foreign lands and people representing them are being represented as primitive or quaint or even animalistic. And so if you think a lot of the survivor programs going around the world, you see them on these island destinations where people are getting voted out of by the tribal council. These foreign lands, you're not seeing people in their real struggles. You're not really seeing how they work for a living. You're not seeing the family structure. What you're seeing is a vacation destination. Those places come off as primitive, quaint, and in some cases animalistic if people are portrayed as not having the latest technology that Americans have. So there you have it. That wraps up our cultural theory chapter, and you'll be able to apply that in today's discussion question response. Have a great day.